if you wouldn't mind calling them and letting them know and inviting them to our gospel meeting. This meeting is for Christians, how we can grow as Christians. In the fall, we'll do a gospel meeting for evangelistic to reach the lost in our community. But I think it'll be a great help to us if you will visit with friends and family and let them know. I can tell you this, I absolutely love the speaker. I mean, he's just outstanding. I could listen to him all day. Wait, I do. Turn over to Luke chapter 18, brethren. We're going to talk about 2 views, 2 prayers, 2 results. What does that mean? Well, we're going to look at it here in just a second. I want you to think about something, and this may seem a little odd, but bear with me. When you look in the mirror, who do you see? Now, it's not a trick question, but when you go to the mirror and you look in it, who is that that's staring back at you? You know, sometimes we see ourselves, but not in the same way that others see us. Sometimes, even though we get familiar to that face in the mirror, sometimes we realize that, you know, the face that we portray to those around us is vastly different. As we grow, as we change, and this is odd, that face in the mirror begins to change with us because we're growing. I think one of the hardest things that we can do as Christians at times is to look into that mirror and understand that there needs to be times in our life where we are going to change. That's what we see in Luke chapter 18. We see 2 men, and we see how they view themselves. What is it that they think about themselves? What is it that they believe to be good or bad in their lives? I mean, if they had the opportunity to look in the mirror, what would they correct? What would they change? Or would they not change anything? It's a very encouraging parable because in a way that's gentle, Jesus says you have to understand that the way you live is going to have an impact on your relationship with God. And I don't know if we always think about that, but it's true. The person in the mirror, well, that person has that relationship with God, and God knows you. He knows your image, and He knows how you live. And He knows the good that we do. And He knows the bad that we do. Now, we do a whole lot of things to hide our image from other people, don't we? Well, I know of some people in this auditorium that dye their hair. And that's me. And, you know, you try to change your image to look different. But you can't change that image before God. Look at Luke chapter 18. We're going to work our way down through this parable and make some application as we go down. Luke chapter 18 and verse 9. And Jesus spoke this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Now there's the context. This isn't just something that Jesus said, hey, I think it'd be a good point right here and now to bring out this parable. In verse 8, He's dealing with some specific people. He's dealing with those who didn't trust in God, but they trusted in themselves. I can't think of a worse thing to trust in than ourselves. We need to trust in God. And He says this, who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Well, that's their character, right? That's what's going on in the inside of them. They trust themselves, they think they're righteous, and they think they're despised. Man, you have to have a pretty impressive image coming back in that mirror to have those 3 attributes applied to your life. And so Jesus enters this parable with the understanding that this is serious. I mean, He really wants us to look deeply into this. And so we have to ask the question, am I perfect? Am I perfect? Is that what I see in the mirror? And remember, there were those who thought they were righteous. And then a second thing that we need to ask, are others flawed? And how do we deal with the flaw that they might have? In this, they despised others. Saw himself as being righteous and saw others as something that should be despised. Now, what is our image? What do we see? How do we look at those around us? Well, it really makes a difference. It's 2 ways to see ourselves. I want you to notice 2 prayers that are offered, beginning there in verse 10. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, and the other a tax collector. 2 vastly different people, church. The Pharisee stood up and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank you that I am not like other men. Hear out what he's saying to God. Extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. Can you imagine the self-righteousness that this man is exalting? Saying, hey, I'm glad that I'm not like everybody around me. He's got the wrong view. He's got the wrong view. In verse 13, and the tax collector, standing afar off, would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. What image do you see for yourself? What image is coming back in the mirror? I want you to notice the perfect man. I want you to notice how this Pharisee saw himself. His prayer contained not anything to do with God and his relationship with God. His prayer contained everything to do with himself. Notice, I fast. I tithe. I. It's all about me. It's all what I do. It's all about my righteousness. Now, isn't that how Jesus began the understanding of this parable in verse 9? About those who trusted in themselves, those who saw themselves as being righteous. And here's the example that Jesus is given to us. This man, in seeing himself righteous, didn't need to pour out his heart to God, didn't need God to guide him in anything. He saw himself in that mirror as being perfect. Well, I'm a righteous man. Well, I don't need to make any changes in my life. Well, you know, when you compare how I'm living to all these people around me, I mean, just look at this tax collector. You know what? I'm doing great. I really don't see anything I need to change. That's his prayer. The perfect person says, look how good I am. But we see the flawed man also. And here in this tax collector, he says, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Now notice, his focus isn't on what he wants. Me. His focus is on what God can do for him. God, be merciful to me because I'm a sinner. He doesn't begin with himself. He begins with God because he knows it is God who can help him in the trouble that he finds himself. Nobody's going to doubt that this man is wrestling with sins. Nobody's going to come away from the impression that this man thinks he's perfect. He's not like the other guy, the Pharisee that's praying next to him. And you get a quick glimpse there in verse 13 of how he sees himself. Look, standing at a distance. He's fearful. I don't want to come close. I don't want to get up there. I'm just going to hang back. I'm going to keep myself at a distance. He sees himself as fearful. He's unwilling to lift his eyes. He's humble. He's humble. I can't do it. I can't look heavenward. It's just not possible because I understand who I am. And I understand what I've done. Look at that again. And the tax collector standing afar off would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven. Then notice also that he reveals to us his anguish, beating his breast. This hurts, God. I'm coming in your presence. I'm offering this prayer. And man, it pains me because of how he sees himself. Two mirrors, two people, two drastically different views. Where do you find yourself in those two people? Do you find yourself at times lapping into this understanding that, you know, I'm so glad that I'm different from everybody around me. You know what the Pharisee's problem was? He was like everybody around him, but he couldn't see it. Or do you find yourself in the flawed man? I get what he's doing. Oh man, I understand that he doesn't want to look heavenward. I can't do it right now either. What I'm wrestling with, the things that I've done, I don't want to look heavenward. I want to humble myself and look down. Where are you? Let me say this. You have to be somewhere in one or the other man. And Jesus, when he tells this parable, there's no gray area. There's no in between. He's talking about those who see themselves as righteous and those who see themselves as flawed and humbled. There's no middle ground. Well, I'm kind of flawed, but I'm kind of righteous. I mean, that's where I am. He presents two views of two different men. Where are you? Where are you? It is true. I don't know who said it. I use it all the time. That sometimes our prayers don't go any higher than the ceiling. And I don't know about you, but I don't think this Pharisee's prayers went very high at all because of how he lived and how he saw himself. Two views, two prayers. Notice two results. Go back beginning in verse 14. It says, I tell you then, this man, the tax collector, this man went down to his house justified, rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Now that's two results. These two men couldn't come and pray to God with their different images of how they saw themselves, and both of them go away right. I mean, it doesn't work. This is a parable showing the difference between two men, one flawed and one who saw himself as perfect. So there's got to be this judgment that's made. And he says of the tax collector, he says, this man went down. What's he say? Look closely. Justified. This man, the flawed man, walked away, and Jesus said of him, there's a difference in this man. There's something about this man. This man sees himself in a way in which he knows he needs to change. He knows he needs to grow. And this is the man who is pleading with God, give me a relationship. Help me to be strong. Help me to be the individual that I know you want to be. And I'm in anguish, and he's beating on his body. And as he looks into the presence of God, he's fearful. I know you're the judge. I know you can do. I know there's going to be a day of accountability. This flawed man sure has the right idea. Go back. 14, one more time. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. Two different views. Now, he takes what the flawed man, the tax collector, did, and he also makes an application, and you got to notice it. We read it so fast we skip over it, but he makes an application to the rich man as well, to the Pharisee as well, and he says this, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. Now, who is that? Well, in the parable, it's the Pharisee. So he's dealing with that man's attitude. So he says to everyone who exalts himself, he'll be humbled. And he who humbles himself will be exalted. Well, that's the example of this tax collector. And it really opens up the understanding that how we live as a child of God is important. It's important, church. Let me kind of say it this way. When we talk about our destiny, when we talk about our relationship with God, there's no kind of sliding in under the fence. There's not going to be this opportunity for us to say, well, you know what I'm going to do? I don't like the way that God sees me, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just kind of go around to the side. Maybe he won't see me and I'll get in. We can't trick God when it comes to our salvation. We can't trick God when it comes to how we truly see ourselves. You don't see any shape or form where this Pharisee has the understanding or the idea, he never even thinks about it. Well, maybe I'm not right with God, so maybe I should. It's not even there. He's blind. He's blind to who he really is. The problem with the the problem with the Pharisee is that he hasn't learned humility. Go over to James. Go over to James, and I want you to notice chapter 4, and notice in verse 6 this. But he gives more grace, therefore, he says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to who? To who does he give grace to? Who is it that merits God's favor in this way? The answer is the humble. Now, you take what it says there. You go back to these two men. There they are, standing in the presence of God. One is up close, thankful that he's not like everybody else. The one is in the back, afraid to go forward, saying, I'm flawed, I'm a sinner. I am like everybody else. Now, notice that. Which man is going to be humbled? Well, it's going to be the tax collector, because he understands a need for God and to get low. To get low. When you go back through the Bible and you begin to see examples with people as they stand before kings, they get low, they humble themselves. They don't stand to the king and look them eye to eye. When they come into that king's presence, they get low. And this is really a thing that you also see in the New Testament. The woman washing Jesus' feet with her tears and her hair. She gets low. The woman who's had that issue of blood for all those years, she works her way through the crowd. And what does she do? She gets the opportunity when she sees Jesus. She doesn't look him in the eyes. She touches the very hem of his garment. You know, the part that goes in all the dust and all the mud. You know, the part that gets frayed through all those years of wearing it and it drags on the ground. Here's a woman who saw this opportunity to see Jesus, and she's going to touch the most humble part that she can. I don't want his eyes. I want his hem. I want the bottom. Now that's how the tax collector saw himself. God, I don't want the eyes. Oh, I know I'm not worried of the eyes. Just let me touch the hem. That's all I'm asking. So the understanding that we see there in verse 6 is that when we are that type of people, when we humble ourselves, God helps us. He gives us more grace. He gives us the understanding that, listen, this is somebody I can work with. This is somebody who's willing for me to work with. This is somebody who understands. Listen, he's not going to take a pass on all the things that the tax collector did wrong. He's not going to give him a pass. He's not going to say that there doesn't need to be improvements, but he is going to say, I like the way this man approaches me, because he humbles himself. And in that way, I can give grace to this man. But he's not the only one there, is he? There's two different results. So now we come to the man who isn't willing to change his impression of himself. So that's all he thinks about is how good I am and how wonderful I am. And this is all that I'm going to be focused on in my life. Go over to verse 10. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. We know without a doubt that this man was not lifted up. I know both verses talk about humility. I get it. But here's a man who was not willing to humble himself. And because he wasn't willing to humble himself, we already know that Jesus said one went home justified and the other not. We know that he's talking about the Pharisee. But here is the gall of this man. I don't need to get low. I don't need to worry about touching the hem. Listen to me. I'm a righteous man. I do this, I do that. I'm not like those people around me. So I have just the right to look God in the eyes. I'm not going to beat my chest. I'm not going to be fearful. And I'm certainly not going to be humble. So what does that Pharisee get? Well, he gets the opposite of verse 10 there. Because he doesn't humble himself, he doesn't get lifted up. One more time, thinking about it this way. In humility, where are you? Do both verses apply to you? Can you step back and say, listen, I see where I need to humble myself and I'm doing it. I see where I need to reach out to God to help me in my relationship, to forgive me in my relationship. So when I look at these two verses, verse 4 and verse 10, I can take comfort in knowing that they apply to me. I'm getting low because God can bring me back up. Is that you? Or have you kind of drifted in the wrong direction? You see all the bad things that are happening around you and all the people who are doing those bad things, and you think, man, I got it made. I got it made. Look at all those bad people. I'm so good. There's no doubt where I'm going. Who are you? Who are you? Go over to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Look at verse 12. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. That's the man who thought he was perfect. He's fallen. Now, in the context of this man's life, the Pharisee, I can't say with absolute certainty how far this man is going to fall. I know he's going to fall because I read verse 12. And he thinks that he is able to stand tall. He thinks that he is one that isn't going to fall. But before he walks out of that temple, he already has and just doesn't know it. And then go over to Romans chapter 3 and verse 23. Romans 3 and verse 23. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. This tax collector knew that he had sinned. And he wasn't trying to change it. And because of that sin, he's fallen short of the glory of God. You couldn't look at any more results that are different. I mean, you just can't find it. And I think it becomes a challenge to us to do all that we can as members of the Lord's church. And what a great privilege and honor that is for us to be in the New Testament church. I don't think any of us want to overestimate ourselves in the presence of God. And I don't think that we want to be a people who underestimate ourselves. God blesses us and God cares for us. And God does raise us up when we're humble. I mean, there are blessings that come with our relationship with God. But then we understand there's the judgment of God. There's the understanding that when we don't please God, there's consequences. Right? I look in my mirror. Listen, brother. I look in my mirror and I see the face that's staring back to me, but sometimes my mind is saying, no, that's not the right image. Whether it's the fact that I feel I'm better than everybody else and I'm perfect, or whether it's the fact that I'm willing to say, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. It matters how we see ourselves. Well, it matters how God sees us. I don't know about you, but I want to be like a tax collector. I don't think I would have ever said that in all my life. But I want to be like this man who understood he needed to get his relationship right with God. Do we have anybody here who needs to get their relationship right with God? We all need a tune-up. We all need to address certain things. Listen, 2 views, 2 prayers, 2 results. How do you see yourself in this parable? We have the opportunity this morning. We want to extend the invitation. If you are here and you'd like us to pray with you, you'd like us to pray for you, well, we'd love to do that, church. If you need encouragement, would you let us encouragement? What a blessing. The church is assembled and we can help and serve one another. And if you need that, we want to help you. If we have any here, I'm looking around, but if we have any here who are not members of the church and you want to follow God's plan of salvation, to hear, believe, repent, confess, and to be baptized, the opportunity is extended. Why wait? We have those folks who are watching on the internet. Why wait? Why not do what you need to do right now to be right with God? Listen, if we can help and encourage you, why don't you come forward as we stand and sing?